The message came to Earth on a cold winter morning, and it changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen was sitting in her small office at the Global Health Research Center when her computer made a strange sound. She looked at the screen and saw symbols she had never seen before. They moved and shifted like living things. At first, she thought it was a virus or some kind of joke, but then the symbols began to form words in English. "We are dying, please help us." Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. She called her colleague, Dr. James Okonkwo, into her office. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a brilliant mind. He looked at the message and his face went pale. "Is this real?" he asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But if it is, we need to take it seriously." They reported the message to their supervisors, who reported it to the government, who reported it to the United Nations. Within hours, the whole world knew. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and the beings who had reached out to them were asking for help. The message came with more information. It explained that the senders were called the Valorians. They lived on a planet very far away in a star system humans had never explored. For thousands of years, they had been a healthy and happy species. But now, a terrible disease was killing them. Their best scientists could not find a cure. They had heard about humans through signals they had picked up from space, and they hoped that humans might be able to help. Many people on Earth were scared. Some said it was a trick or a trap. Others said humans should focus on their own problems. But there were also many who felt compassion for these unknown beings who were suffering so far away. Sarah Chen was one of those people. She volunteered to be part of the team that would study the information the Valorians had sent about their disease. The data was complex, but human scientists worked hard to understand it. They learned that the Valorians had bodies very different from humans. They had 6 limbs and 2 hearts. Their blood was purple, not red. But they were living beings who could think and feel and love, just like humans. The disease was attacking their nervous system. It moved slowly at first, but then it spread quickly through the body. The Valorians had tried many treatments, but nothing worked. They estimated that within 20 years, their entire species would be gone. Sarah felt a heavy weight in her heart when she read this. She thought about all those beings, watching their friends and families die, knowing that their children might be the last generation. She could not let that happen if there was any way to stop it. The Valorians sent biological samples through space. It took them 3 months to reach Earth. When the samples arrived, they were studied with great care. Sarah and James were part of the team that examined them in a secure laboratory. "Their cellular structure is fascinating," James said, looking through a powerful microscope. "Very different from ours, but there are some similarities." Sarah nodded. She was studying the pathogen that caused the disease. It was a tiny organism, smaller than any virus she had seen before. But she noticed something interesting. "Look at this," she said to James. "The pathogen has a weak point. It seems to be vulnerable to certain enzymes." James came over to look. His eyes widened. "You're right, but these enzymes don't exist in Valorian biology." "No," Sarah agreed, "but they exist in human biology." This was the breakthrough they needed. Human bodies produced certain enzymes that could potentially destroy the pathogen. But they couldn't just send human enzymes to another planet. They needed to find a way to create a treatment that would work for the Valorians. Sarah began working day and night. She barely slept. She barely ate. Her husband worried about her, but she told him she couldn't stop. Lives were depending on her. Other scientists joined the effort. Teams from all over the world came together. Americans worked with Russians. Chinese worked with Indians. Europeans worked with Africans. For the first time in history, all of humanity was united in a single goal: to save an alien species they had never met. It was not easy. There were many failures. Many times Sarah wanted to give up. The science was so complex. The differences between human and Valorian biology were so great. But every time she felt like quitting, she thought about the Valorians. She thought about their children who might never grow up. She thought about their elders who had watched so many die. After 6 months of work, Sarah had an idea. What if they could modify human enzymes to work inside Valorian bodies? It would require genetic engineering on a level never attempted before. Many scientists said it was impossible, but Sarah believed it could be done. She started with simple experiments. She tested modified enzymes on Valorian cell samples. Most of the time, the enzymes did nothing. Sometimes they made things worse, but once in a while they showed promise. James was her constant companion through this work. He never lost faith in her, even when she lost faith in herself. "You can do this," he told her one night when she was crying from exhaustion. "I have seen you solve problems that no one else could solve. This is just another problem." Sarah wiped her tears and went back to work. After another 3 months, she had a breakthrough, a modified enzyme that destroyed the pathogen without harming Valorian cells. She tested it again and again. Every time it worked. "I think we have it," she whispered to James. "I think we really have it." But they needed to be sure. They sent the formula to the Valorians through the same communication channel they had used before. They asked the Valorians to test it on sick individuals. The waiting was the hardest part. It took weeks for the message to travel across space, then more weeks for the Valorians to conduct their tests. Sarah could barely function during this time. She kept imagining all the things that could go wrong. Finally, the response came. Sarah was in her office when her computer made that strange sound again. She saw the alien symbols forming words. "It works. The sick are getting better. You have saved us." Sarah burst into tears. James came running when he heard her crying. When he read the message, he started crying too. They held each other and laughed and cried at the same time. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Humanity had done something amazing. They had saved an entire species from extinction. People danced in the streets. They hugged strangers. For a moment, all the divisions and conflicts that usually separated humans seemed to disappear. But the story was not over. The Valorians wanted to meet the humans who had saved them. They invited Sarah and a team of scientists to visit their planet. It was a journey that would take years, but special ships were being built that could make the trip. Sarah knew she had to go. This was the greatest adventure in human history, and she was going to be part of it. The Valorians had sent their most advanced ship to pick up the human delegation. Sarah stood with the other scientists and officials at the launch site, looking up at the strange vessel that had landed in a field outside Geneva. It was silver and smooth, shaped like a teardrop. There were no windows that she could see, and no doors until a section of the hull simply melted away to reveal an opening. A Valorian emerged from the ship. It was the first time any human had seen one of them in person. The being was tall and slender, with blue-gray skin and large eyes that seemed to hold deep wisdom. It had 6 limbs, as the data had indicated, and moved with a grace that reminded Sarah of water flowing. "I am Ambassador Kylan," the Valorian said. Its voice was soft and musical. "On behalf of my people, I thank you for what you have done. You have given us life when we thought only death awaited." Sarah stepped forward. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt strangely calm. "We are happy we could help," she said. "No one should have to face extinction alone." Ambassador Kylan made a gesture that Sarah understood as a smile, even though the Valorian had no mouth like humans did. "You are kind. We have much to learn from each other." The journey to the Valorian homeworld took 18 months in the advanced ship. During that time, Sarah and the other humans learned the Valorian language and customs. They discovered that the Valorians were a peaceful species who valued knowledge and harmony above all else. They had never known war. They could not understand why humans fought each other so often. "We are a complicated species," Sarah admitted to Kylan one day as they sat in the ship's observation room, watching stars streak by. "We do terrible things to each other sometimes, but we also do wonderful things. I think that is what makes us human." Kylan considered this. "Perhaps it is your capacity for both darkness and light that makes you so creative. Our scientists could not find a cure because they thought only in straight lines. Your scientists think in spirals and circles. You see connections we cannot see." Sarah smiled. She had never thought of it that way, but Kylan was right. Human creativity often came from unexpected places. The cure for the Valorian disease had come from an understanding of human digestive enzymes, something no Valorian scientist would have thought to study. When they finally arrived at the Valorian homeworld, called Valoria, Sarah was overwhelmed by its beauty. The planet was covered in forests of purple and silver trees. Rivers flowed with water that sparkled like diamonds. The cities were built into the landscape so gently that it was hard to tell where nature ended and civilization began. Millions of Valorians had gathered to welcome the humans. They filled the streets and the rooftops and the floating platforms that hovered in the air. When Sarah and her team stepped off the ship, the Valorians made a sound together, a low humming that vibrated through Sarah's body. It was their way of expressing gratitude. "They are singing for you," Kylan explained. "This song has not been sung for 10,000 years. It is the song of life restored." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. She looked at James, who was standing beside her, and saw that he was crying too. They had done something that mattered. They had made a difference that would last forever. The human delegation was treated like heroes on Valoria. They were given the finest quarters, the most delicious food, and access to any knowledge they wanted. Sarah spent hours every day learning about Valorian science and medicine. They had technologies that humans had only dreamed of, but they also had gaps in their knowledge that humans could fill. "It is strange," said a Valorian scientist named Myra, who had become Sarah's close friend. "We have traveled the stars for thousands of years. We have mapped galaxies and understood the nature of time itself, but we could not cure a simple disease. And you, who have barely left your own planet, found the answer in months." Sarah thought about this. "I think it is because we are young as a species. We are still learning. We make many mistakes, but we also make many discoveries. We are not afraid to try new things, even if they seem foolish." Myra nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is wisdom. We have become set in our ways. We have forgotten how to be young." The human team stayed on Valoria for 2 years, sharing knowledge and learning from their hosts. During this time, Sarah and her colleagues developed treatments for several other diseases that had plagued the Valorians for centuries. Each cure was celebrated with the song of life restored. But the most important discovery came near the end of their stay. Sarah was studying Valorian genetic code when she noticed something unusual. There was a pattern in their DNA that seemed familiar, but she could not place it. She worked on it for weeks, comparing it to human genetic data. Finally, she understood. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "come look at this." James examined the data. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, wonder. "This cannot be right," he said. "I have checked it 100 times. It is right." The pattern in Valorian DNA was identical to a pattern in human DNA. Not similar, but identical. The odds of this happening by chance were essentially zero. It meant that, somehow, billions of years ago, humans and Valorians had shared a common ancestor. They were family. When they shared this discovery with the Valorians, the reaction was profound. Many Valorians wept, others sang. Some simply sat in silence, trying to understand what it meant. "We searched the stars for so long looking for others like us," Kylan said to Sarah. "We found many species, but none that felt like kin. And now we know why. Our kin were not among the stars. They were on a small blue planet waiting to meet us." Sarah held Kylan's hand. The Valorian skin was cool and smooth, but Sarah could feel warmth beneath the surface. "We were waiting for you too," she said. "We just did not know it." The news of this discovery spread to Earth and changed the way humans thought about themselves. They were not alone in the universe, and they were not accidents. They were part of a larger family, connected to beings across the cosmos by bonds that transcended time and space. Some people found this comforting, others found it frightening, but everyone agreed that nothing would ever be the same. When it was time for the human delegation to return to Earth, Sarah found it hard to say goodbye. She had grown to love Veloria and its people. She had found friendship and purpose here that she had never known before. "You must go back," Kylan said. "Your people need to know what you have learned, and there are other species out there, other cousins waiting to be found. Humanity has a role to play in the galaxy now." Sarah knew Kylan was right. The cure she had developed was just the beginning. Humanity had proven that they could help others, that they could be a force for good in the universe. Now they had to live up to that promise. The journey home felt shorter than the journey out. Perhaps it was because Sarah knew what was waiting for her. Earth had changed in the years she had been gone. The success of the Valorian cure had inspired a new era of cooperation and hope. Countries that had been enemies were now working together. Resources that had been wasted on weapons were being used for science and medicine. When Sarah's ship landed back on Earth, she was greeted by crowds even larger than the ones on Veloria. People had come from all over the world to welcome her home. They held signs in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing: "Thank you." Sarah stood before the crowds and took a deep breath. She thought about everything that had happened, everything she had learned. "When we first received the message from the Valorians," she began, "many people were afraid. They thought we should ignore it or that it was some kind of trick. But we chose to help. We chose compassion over fear. And because of that choice, a whole species is alive today." The crowd cheered. "But the most important thing we learned," Sarah continued, "is that we are not alone. We are part of a larger family that stretches across the stars. And as members of that family, we have a responsibility. We must be the best version of ourselves. We must use our gifts to help others, not just ourselves." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "The universe is vast and full of wonders. There are other species out there, some of them in trouble, some of them waiting to be found. And we, humanity, have shown that we can make a difference. Let us continue to do so. Let us be the helpers, the healers, the ones who answer when others call for aid." The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very ground. In the years that followed, Sarah's words became a guiding principle for humanity. Earth sent ships to distant stars, not to conquer or exploit, but to help. Human scientists developed cures for diseases on a dozen different worlds. Human engineers helped build cities and infrastructure. Human artists shared their creativity with species who had forgotten how to dream. And always at the heart of it all was the simple truth that Sarah had discovered. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their intelligence. It was their compassion, their willingness to help others even at great cost to themselves. The Valorians never forgot what the humans had done for them. They became humanity's closest allies and friends. Valorian and human children grew up together, learning each other's languages and customs. The song of life restored was sung on both planets, a reminder of the bond that connected them. Sarah Chen lived to be very old. She saw things she had never imagined: humans and Valorians exploring the galaxy together, discovering new species and new wonders. She saw wars ended and conflicts resolved through understanding rather than violence. She saw the beginning of a new era for all sentient life. On her deathbed, surrounded by her family and friends from two worlds, Sarah smiled. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." Kylan, now old and gray, held her hand. "You did it, Sarah. You showed us what was possible. You showed the whole universe what humanity could be." Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about the cold winter morning when she had first received the message from the stars. She thought about all the work and all the doubt and all the hope. and she knew that it had all been worth it. When she died, she was at peace. The story of Sarah Chen and the Valorian cure became legend. It was taught in schools on every planet. It inspired generations of scientists and healers and helpers. And whenever humans encountered a new species in need, they remembered Sarah's words. No one should have to face extinction alone. 20 years after Sarah's death, a new message came from the stars. It was from a species called the Vorthani, and they were dying from a disease their scientists could not cure. Dr. Maya Chen, Sarah's granddaughter, read the message in her office at the Global Galactic Health Center. She smiled, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her about that first message so long ago. "Let's get to work," she said to her team. And humanity, as always, answered the call. The Vorthani were very different from the Valorians. They were small creatures, no bigger than human cats, with fur the color of flames and eyes like black diamonds. They lived on a hot planet near a red giant star, in cities built from crystal and glass. Their civilization was ancient, older than human recorded history, and they had achieved wonders that humans were only beginning to understand. But their disease was killing them just the same. Dr. Maya Chen studied the data the Vorthani had sent. The pathogen was unlike anything she had seen before. It was not a virus or a bacteria or a parasite. It was something entirely new, something that seemed to exist partly in normal space and partly in dimensions that humans did not fully understand. "This is going to be difficult," said Dr. Kofi Mensah, her colleague and closest friend. He was the grandson of the great James Okonkwo, who had worked alongside Sarah Chen all those years ago. "Maybe impossible." Maya shook her head. "My grandmother never believed in impossible. She believed that every problem has a solution. We just have to find it." They assembled a team that included humans, Valorians, and scientists from 3 other species that humanity had befriended over the years. Each species brought different knowledge and perspectives. The humans brought their creativity and willingness to try new things. The Valorians brought their understanding of complex biological systems. The Kreen, insect-like beings from a cold world, brought their expertise in chemistry. The Luminara, beings made of pure light, brought their knowledge of dimensional physics. For months, they worked without success. The pathogen seemed to adapt to every treatment they tried. It was as if it was alive in a way that normal pathogens were not, as if it could think and plan and fight back. Maya grew frustrated. She thought about her grandmother often, wondering what Sarah would do in this situation. One night, unable to sleep, Maya went to the laboratory. She stared at the samples of Vorthani cells infected with the pathogen. She watched the pathogen move and shift, destroying everything in its path. And then she had an idea. What if they could not kill the pathogen because it was not really alive? What if it was something else entirely, something that existed by different rules? She called an emergency meeting of the team. "I think the pathogen is a dimensional parasite," she explained. "It exists in multiple dimensions at once. When we attack it in our dimension, it simply shifts to another dimension and survives." The Luminara scientists became very excited. "This makes sense," one of them said. "We have encountered such entities before, though never one that affected biological life in this way." "Can we attack it in multiple dimensions at once?" Kofi asked. "Perhaps," Maya said, "but we would need to create a treatment that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The technology for this does not exist." There was a long silence. Then one of the Valorian scientists spoke up. Her name was Sela, and she was the great-great-granddaughter of Myra, Sarah Chen's friend from so long ago. "The technology does not exist yet," Sela said, "but we can create it. We have done the impossible before. We can do it again." And so they began the hardest work of their lives. It took 3 years to develop the multidimensional treatment. During that time, millions of Vorthani died. Maya felt the weight of each death on her heart. She pushed herself harder, sleeping only a few hours a night, eating only when her body demanded it. Kofi worried about her. "You are going to kill yourself," he said. "Your grandmother worked hard, but she also knew when to rest." Maya looked at him with tired eyes. "My grandmother saved an entire species. How can I do any less?" Kofi put his hand on her shoulder. "By staying alive long enough to finish the job, dead scientists do not find cures." Maya knew he was right. She forced herself to take breaks, to eat properly, to sleep. She hated every moment of rest because it felt like she was abandoning the Vorthani, but she also knew that she needed her strength for the work ahead. Finally, after 3 years of effort, they had a prototype treatment. It was a complex device that generated a field capable of existing in multiple dimensions at once. Within that field, they could deploy a modified version of the enzyme treatment that Sarah Chen had developed for the Valorians. The first tests were failures. The field collapsed before the enzymes could reach the pathogen. They adjusted and tried again. More failures. They adjusted and tried again. After 6 more months of work, they had a success. A single Vorthani, near death from the disease, was cured. Maya wept when she heard the news. Kofi held her and wept too. But one success did not mean they were finished. They had to test the treatment many more times to make sure it was safe and effective. They had to produce enough of the devices to treat the entire Vorthani population. They had to train Vorthani scientists to use the devices. It took another 2 years before the treatment was fully implemented. By then, the Vorthani population had been reduced to less than half of what it had been when the message first came to Earth. But the survivors were alive, and their children would live, and their species would continue. The Vorthani were not a species that showed emotion easily. Their culture valued calm and rationality above all else. But when the last patient was cured, when the disease was finally defeated, even the Vorthani could not contain their feelings. Their leader, a small being with fur like sunset and eyes like midnight, came to thank Maya and her team in person. "We have existed for 100,000 of your years," the leader said. "We have seen stars born and die. We have mapped the mysteries of the universe. But we had never seen true generosity until we met your species." Maya felt humbled. "We only did what anyone would do," she said. "We helped because you needed help." The leader made a gesture that Maya understood as disagreement. "Not anyone would do this. We have met many species in our long history. Most would not help. Some would only help if they received something in return. But humans help because it is who you are. This is a precious and rare thing." Maya thought about her grandmother's words. No one should have to face extinction alone. "My grandmother taught me that," she said. "She taught all of humanity that. We are still learning, but we are trying to live up to her example." The leader bowed. "Your grandmother must have been a remarkable being." "She was," Maya agreed. "She was extraordinary." The success with the Vorthani spread across the galaxy, just as the success with the Valorians had spread so many years before. More species heard about what humans could do. More messages came, asking for help. Maya and her team developed faster methods for analyzing new pathogens. They trained scientists from dozens of species. They established research stations on 100 worlds, all working together to fight disease and suffering wherever it was found. But Maya never forgot where it all started. She never forgot that cold winter morning when her grandmother received a message from the stars. On the 30th anniversary of Sarah Chen's death, Maya visited her grandmother's grave. It was a simple spot in a garden on Earth, marked by a stone with Sarah's name and a single phrase: "She taught us to help." Kofi came with her. They stood in silence for a long time, remembering. "Do you think she knew?" Maya asked finally. "Do you think she knew how much her work would change everything?" Kofi considered the question. "I think she hoped. I think she believed that if humans could be shown what was possible, they would rise to meet it, and she was right." Maya nodded. She was right. They stood a while longer, and then they left to return to their work. There were more species that needed help, more problems that needed solving, more miracles waiting to be discovered. And humanity, as always, was ready. The galaxy had changed in the decades since Sarah Chen's first cure. What had once been scattered civilizations, isolated and alone, had become a connected community. Species that had never imagined contact with others were now working side by side. Diseases that had seemed invincible were being defeated one by one. But new challenges always arose. 50 years after the Vorthani cure, a new threat emerged. It was not a disease this time, but something far more dangerous. A cascade failure in the dimensional barriers that separated different planes of existence. The Luminara were the first to notice it. Their dimension-sensitive bodies detected the weakening of the barriers long before any instruments could measure it. They sent an urgent message to all the civilizations they knew. "The walls between worlds are falling," the message said. "If they collapse entirely, all life in all dimensions will be destroyed. We do not know how to stop it." The response was immediate. Scientists from every species gathered to study the problem. The greatest minds in the galaxy worked together, sharing knowledge and ideas. But the cascade failure was accelerating faster than they could understand it. Dr. Jin Chen, Maya's son and Sarah's great-grandson, led the research effort. He was a brilliant physicist, known for his work on dimensional theory, but even he was overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. "We need something new," he told the assembled scientists. "Something none of us has ever thought of before. We need a breakthrough that goes beyond all our existing knowledge." The scientists looked at each other in despair. How could they discover something entirely new in the short time they had? The cascade failure was accelerating. They had perhaps 10 years, perhaps less. Then a young human scientist named Aisha stood up. She was barely 20 years old, still a student, but she had been invited to the gathering because of her unusual ideas. "What if the cascade failure is not natural?" she asked. "What if it was started deliberately by someone or something?" The room fell silent. "Why would anyone start such a thing?" a Valorian scientist asked. "It would destroy them as well as everyone else." "Maybe not," Aisha said. "Maybe they exist outside our dimensions, in a place the collapse would not reach. Maybe they want to consume the energy released by the collapse." Jin Chen listened carefully. The idea was wild, almost impossible, but there was something about it that felt right. "How will we test this theory?" he asked. Aisha hesitated. "We would need to send a probe beyond the dimensional barriers, into the space between dimensions. We do not have the technology to do that." "We did not have the technology to cure the Valorians either," Jin said. "But my great-grandmother found a way. We will find a way too." And so they did. It took 4 years to develop a probe that could survive outside normal dimensions. During that time, the cascade failure continued to accelerate. Whole star systems began to flicker in and out of existence as the barriers weakened. When the probe was finally ready, Jin Chen himself volunteered to guide it. The technology required a human consciousness to navigate the strange non-space beyond the barriers. It was dangerous, perhaps fatal. "You cannot do this," Maya told her son. She was old now, her hair white and her hands trembling, but her eyes were still sharp, still full of life. "You are too important to the project." Jin smiled. It was a smile that reminded Maya of her grandmother. "No one is too important to take risks for others. That is what our family believes. That is what you taught me." Maya wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The Chen family had always led by example. They had always been willing to sacrifice for the greater good. Jin entered the probe chamber. His consciousness was connected to the machine through a neural link. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he was flying through spaces that had no name, past colors that did not exist, towards something that waited in the dark between worlds. What he found there was beyond anything he could have imagined. It was a being, or perhaps many beings that were also one being. It was vast, spanning dimensions that humans could not perceive, and it was hungry. "What are you?" Jin asked, though he had no voice here. The being answered, though it had no words. Jin understood that this entity had existed since before time began. It fed on the energy of dimensional collapses. It had caused many collapses throughout the history of the multiverse, devouring entire realities. Now it was hungry again. Jin felt despair. How could they fight something like this? How could they even understand it? But then he remembered something his great-grandmother had written in her journals. Something about the nature of consciousness and its power to shape reality. Jin reached out with his mind. He did not attack the entity. He did not try to fight it. Instead, he tried to communicate with it. He shared his memories of life, of love, of compassion. He showed the entity what it meant to be alive, to feel joy and sorrow, to care about others. The entity paused. It had never encountered anything like this before. The minds it usually consumed were primitive things, barely aware. But this mind was complex and beautiful, full of strange new patterns. Jin shared more. He shared memories of his mother and his great-grandmother. He shared the story of the Valorian cure and the Vorthani cure. He shared the dream of a galaxy united by compassion and cooperation. The entity was fascinated. These patterns were delicious, not as food but as experience. They filled something in the entity that it had not known was empty. Jin felt hope rising. "You do not have to destroy," he communicated. "You can experience, you can learn, you can grow." The entity considered this. It had never thought of existence in any way other than consumption, but the patterns Jin shared suggested other possibilities. Slowly, the entity withdrew its influence. The cascade failure began to reverse. The dimensional barriers strengthened. Jin returned to his body exhausted but alive. When he told the other scientists what had happened, they were amazed. "You communicated with it?" Aisha asked, her eyes wide. "How?" "I shared humanity with it," Jin said. "I shared the best of what we are, and it was enough." The entity did not disappear. It remained in the space between dimensions, but it no longer tried to cause collapses. Instead, it became curious about the life that existed in the dimensions around it. It reached out, tentatively, to learn more. Some species were frightened of the entity. Others were hostile. But humans, led by the Chen family, approached it with the same compassion they showed all beings. They taught it about art and music, about love and laughter, about the infinite variety of life. In time, the entity became something like a friend. It shared its own knowledge of the multiverse that no one else possessed. It helped species travel between dimensions. It protected the barriers it had once tried to destroy. And all of this because one family, one species, had refused to stop caring. 100 years after Sarah Chen received the first message from the stars, the galaxy celebrated a great anniversary. Representatives from every known species gathered on Earth, in the garden where Sarah was buried, to honor her memory. Dr. Lin Chen, the latest in the long line of Chen family scientists, gave the keynote speech. She was young and brilliant, full of the same fire that had burned in her ancestor. 100 years ago, Lin said, a message came from the stars. It asked for help. And one woman, my ancestor Sarah Chen, answered that call. She did not know if she could find a cure. She did not know if the Valorians were friends or enemies. She only knew that someone was suffering and she could not turn away. Lin looked out at the assembled beings. There were Valorians with their blue-gray skin and 6 limbs. There were Vorthani with their flame-colored fur. There were Luminara, beings of pure light. There were dozens of other species, some of them saved by human cures, some of them saviors in their own right. What Sarah taught us, Lin continued, is that compassion is not a weakness. It is the greatest strength in the universe. It can heal diseases. It can bridge dimensions. It can turn enemies into friends and strangers into family. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. We humans are not the smartest species in the galaxy. We are not the oldest or the most powerful, but we have something that is rare and precious. We have the ability to care, to feel, to connect. And we have learned to use that ability not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The gathered beings made sounds of agreement, each in their own way. The garden filled with humming and chirping and glowing, and the thousand other ways that sentient creatures expressed approval. The universe is vast, Lynn said. There are still species we have not met, problems we have not solved, challenges we cannot imagine. But I know that whatever comes, we will face it together. We will face it with compassion and courage and hope, because that is who we are. That is what Sarah Chen taught us to be. Lynn stepped down from the podium. She walked to her ancestor's grave, where Maya Chen, now very old, was waiting in a floating chair. "Did I do okay, grandmother?" Lynn asked. Maya smiled. It was the same smile that had graced Sarah's face, and Maya's and countless Chen's through the generations. "You did wonderfully," Maya said. "Your great-great-grandmother would be proud." Lynn knelt and placed her hand on the gravestone. She felt a connection to the woman who had started it all, 100 years ago, in a small office on a cold winter morning. "Thank you," Lynn whispered. "Thank you for teaching us how to be human." The celebration continued through the night. Beings from across the galaxy shared stories and songs, memories and dreams. They remembered the past and planned for the future. They celebrated what they had achieved and prepared for what was still to come. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, the great entity watched and learned. It had once sought to destroy everything. Now it sought to understand, to experience, to grow. It had been transformed by compassion, just as so many others had been transformed. The universe was vast and full of mysteries. There were still dangers and challenges, still problems that seemed impossible to solve. But as long as there were beings who cared, who refused to turn away from those in need, there was hope. Humanity had stumbled out of its cradle world, small and afraid and very young. But they had proven that even the smallest beings could make a difference. They had shown that the power to heal was greater than the power to harm. And they had done it together, as a family, as a species, as part of a galaxy that was learning what it truly meant to be alive. This was the legacy of Sarah Chen. This was the gift she had given to the universe. And it would never be forgotten.